Hi everyone, Joe Gentili from Saraf Gentili LLP. One area we do a lot of work in is with EB-5 disputes. So lots of disputes in the EB-5 world. If you really think about it, it's kind of a perfect storm to have disputes. You have lots of money going around in the EB-5 world. The amount of money people are investing is very large. A big chunk of that money goes into the real estate industry, which, let's say, doesn't have the best reputation for honest dealing. You have a lot of professionals that are feeding at the trough on EB-5 that are only getting paid if a deal goes through, so they don't really have much incentive to make sure that a person understands what they're investing in really thoroughly before they invest in it. Because if you do, there's a chance you won't make the investment. And there's a lot of people in the EB-5 world as investors that, while they have money and lots of smart, sophisticated people, they may not have a lot of experience investing in limited partnerships or LLCs in the US. So a lot of the contract language surrounding these things, particularly to EB-5 investments, can be very complex. So very easy to miss things in this world. And so a lot of disputes there. And I want to highlight what I think is probably the most underutilized tool that investors can use if they find themselves in a dispute in EB-5. And so the tool is a books and records demand. So it's a pretty humble tool, really. My background and my partner's background, we originally come from the world of securities litigation and corporate litigation. And in that world, books and records demands are used all the time. But it hasn't really, for whatever reason, found its way completely into the EB-5 world yet. They're effective. They really help. And what they are is that under certain state laws, if you're an investor in a company, whether it's a partnership or a corporation, you as the investor have the right to inspect the books of the company. So you could inspect their financials, you could inspect other types of documents that they have, board minutes, all sorts of things, really. There are some documents like the financials that you can get your hands on almost as a matter of course. And then there are other documents that you can get your hands on if you have a legitimate reason to want to look at them. So if you have a real grounded suspicion that there's gross mismanagement going on or fraud or something like that, you have the right to get your hands on a pretty wide scope of documents that the company has. So exactly what you can get and how you can get it and all that, it's very dependent on the state of incorporation of the company that you invested in and the specific language sometimes in the agreement that you signed. So before you just go and fire off a books and records demands, you should probably have a lawyer look over the agreement, do a little research on the state law. This way, everything kind of comports with the law, and you're asking for what you're entitled to. And these books and records demand I find to be very useful, particularly in two scenarios that come up a lot in the EB-5 world. So scenario number one is, and this happens particularly at the 829 stage, when you're at the removal of condition stage. You, the investor, will get a request for evidence from USCIS, or you'll get a notice of intent to deny because there's certain documentation about the investments that haven't been provided to USCIS, and you, the investor, don't have access to that. Only the regional center has access to it. And for whatever reason, the regional center is just not complying. They're not providing the information. They really look like they could end up having you get denied, or they're going to take it right down to the wire where you may get denied because they're just not cooperating, providing the information. So the books and records demand is a pretty useful tool at that point to get them, to pressure them to provide the information. You get a lawyer on the scene. Usually they have a contractual obligation to provide this information. So you make a books and records demand, you make a demand alleging that there's a breach of contract, you're really setting up a very strong legal case that if they don't comply with that, they're putting themselves really in the crosshairs for a significant damages case later on if they don't. Provides a lot of motivation for the regional center and the projects to comply and get you the information that you need. So the books and records demand is useful there. Another area where it's useful is if you're having problems getting your money back. You're having problems getting your money back at all or within a certain time frame, a books and records demand can be useful to apply pressure on that negotiation, especially if there's a suspicion of fraud, that things that you've been lied to, or just really gross mismanagement. If there's a suspicion of those things, and especially if you have a little bit of evidence behind it, you're able to request a lot of documents and on a lot of topics that the regional center or the project is probably very uncomfortable to share information on. If you're really targeted in what you're asking for, and the agreement and the state law that you're operating under gives you a lot of latitude, you could really put them in a very uncomfortable situation in terms of what they are legally required to provide you. And sometimes that's enough to nip the problem in the bud, where they'll be more willing to negotiate because they don't want a third party, you, the investor, to have information that potentially compromises them or puts them in a bad light for future litigation. And if it doesn't nip it in the bud, what the books and records demand may do is give you ammo for a future legal proceeding. So in the world that I came from, the securities world and the corporate litigation world, that's primarily what books and records demands were used for. So we would look at a situation, usually it was a publicly traded company, where there was indication of some sort of impropriety. We'd make a books and records demand, and we're looking to get information from that demand in order to put together a stronger complaint when we do eventually file a lawsuit. And sometimes they were effective with that, sometimes not, but it was almost a necessary step to do for certain types of cases. And I think that would be the case here in EB-5 as well. It's something that would be very helpful in terms of putting together ammunition and evidence for an eventual litigation if it came to that. So these are very useful tools. I don't think they're being used often enough in these disputes. I suspect that's going to change sometime in the future. But it's definitely something to keep in mind if you have a dispute in EB-5, either with getting your money back or getting cooperation to get the documentation you need to satisfy USCIS. So if you have any questions at all, please feel free to reach out. And if this was useful, I hope you subscribe. Thank you.